Luka releases a statement. Dave apologizes. Let's get into it. Hey, before we get started, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you don't miss any content that comes out here on the channel in the future. Let me start today with what's going to sound a little bit like a defense of myself, but I would define it more as me just restating what I've already publicly stated, because many of you have based your entire opinion on this channel just based off of 1 or 2 minute segments. An episode maybe you didn't watch in its entirety, or you've seen clips that I've posted on Instagram that are 90 seconds long. I'm also hearing people say things like, John defended Dave, let's see him spin this, or let's see John move toward public opinion, insinuating that the things I'm talking about on this channel are based on community sentiment, not my personal opinion. And I've also seen people insinuate that I'm calling for Dave's job. So I just want to clear all of that up right off the front and say that at no point have I called for Dave's job or tried to get him fired. What I'm looking for is truth and accountability. Now, that accountability piece is never going to be my decision. I understand that. But what I can use this channel for is to talk about the truth as we learn it and add context to the conversation. That way we're being productive around what's happening within the community. I also think I've been incredibly fair from the very beginning, and a lot of people struggle with this concept that you can point out good and bad things in a person and that they can both be true at the same time. It's possible to understand that sometimes things feel contradictory, but they can both still be true. Someone can exhibit narcissistic behavior, but not be intentionally malicious. They just happen to lack emotional maturity to handle whatever situation happens to be in front of them at the time. It's also possible to believe that someone like Dave, as an example, loves the games and has done more for the CrossFit games than anyone else in the space ever has or ever will, while simultaneously believing that they've shown critical errors in judgment and have lost credibility and trust amongst athletes in the community. So keeping those thoughts in mind, let's just jump in. So yesterday, Luca Dukic issued a statement. I'm not going to reread that in its entirety here, but if I could sum it up, it basically paints Dave Castro as someone who lacked empathy in the moment and lied to him and the community by saying that the family blessed the CrossFit Games continuing when in fact the family did not bless it continuing. You can find the full statement that Luca issued on his Instagram page. So there are parts of that obviously generated big emotions in the community for many. More importantly, I think the statement added context and insight to the events of the day that many people didn't believe happened or just didn't understand what had happened. When Luca issued a statement, I treated it as fact from the very beginning, and a lot of people were questioning me how I could do that with the understanding that Luca was obviously understandably recovering from the shock of the moment of losing his brother. People were questioning whether maybe it was lost in translation because of a language barrier or just didn't fully comprehend because of the severity of the moment. The reason why I've treated it as factual from the very beginning are this. Number one, you're never going to find me in a moment of victim or trauma blaming. I think victims rarely lie. And in this case, Luca simply doesn't have a reason to. I know that many people believe that maybe he was setting something up for a lawsuit down the road. But when you really look at the statement, it only paints Dave in a bad light emotionally. It indicates someone who lacks caring and empathy. And for those purposes, not really going to help a lawsuit. Secondly, the events that Luca described lined up to other eyewitness statements we've seen. And he mentioned in the statement that there were witnesses to the conversations he had with Dave, specifically Nicole Carroll and Team Richie, his friends, Craig and Jazz. So at a minimum, he would have known that if he were indeed lying to everyone around the events that happened, Nicole Carroll could come out and say it didn't happen this way. So he really has no reason to lie. Now, as fate would have it, later in the evening, Dave Castro issued a statement apologizing to the Dukic family and confirmed that he should not have said the family blessed the games continuing and that the decision to continue was made by CrossFit, essentially confirming what Luca told us was true and accurate. Now, much like Luca's statement, I'm not publicly questioning Dave's apology or even his intentions behind it. I think you have to take both of the statements at face value without judging motivation. That isn't a contradictory statement, and it doesn't impede our understanding of the facts of what happened, and it won't keep accountability from happening. It doesn't change the incident or the response to that incident. When you read Dave's full statement, he closes it by saying that he's never run into a situation like this and that he absolutely made a mistake. And while I personally admire that level of accountability and I sympathize with him, that has never been in what I can only view as an unimaginable position, lack of planning and foresight got him there. Now, that doesn't fall completely on him. This is an organizational issue that I've been talking about for some time, but he has been and essentially is the face of the organization. And at a director level, he does have immense influence over the strategic direction and planning of the games. So when you think of it in terms like that, this is a crippling moment from which the organization and Dave may never recover. What that means is we need to use the facts we have at hand to start determining our way forward as individuals while we wait for the organization to complete its investigation and announce their way forward to recovery. Here are the facts as we know them as it stands today. On the first point, you have the firsthand account that we got last week from Mike Halpin, who runs Known and Unknowable. He did a minute-by-minute timeline of what happened. It's really brilliant. It lines up with multiple firsthand accounts, as well as witnesses interviewed, and in my opinion, tells the most complete story of what happened that day. It's safe to say that the event itself lacked safety and emergency response plans, and certainly had a lack of proper planning that led to a chaotic and a confusing environment in the moment. Even without a cause of death or an autopsy or truly understanding what happened to Lazar the individual, it's very clear that CrossFit was not prepared for an emergency situation, and this lack of proper planning made a rescue impossible. We also know from Luca's statement, as well as Dave's apology, that the way in which Luka was treated lacked empathy and was certainly untruthful in parts, and has been perceived as the business of the CrossFit Games being the key priority over the emotional well-being of those most affected, which, by the way, includes far more than just Luka and his family. It includes all the athletes involved, as well as the spectators. It's that point, the quote-unquote lie and this loss of trust, that I think is the key point we need to be focused on. As I see it, there are two issues the company has to address moving forward if it plans to survive this moment, and a few decisions the community needs to make. First of all, CrossFit obviously needs to complete their investigation. We've heard that over and over. People continue to hammer that home, and they're right. We need to wait for the investigation to end before we have a full understanding of what happened. And while I agree that there should be a thorough, transparent investigation, and there should be accountability that comes with that, I think if we're being honest with ourselves, the community needs to prepare for the fact that they will likely never know what full transparency looks like. There's very little chance we as a community are going to get the full investigation handed to us, and what we do get will likely be heavily redacted to protect individuals' privacy, as it should be. The one thing CrossFit needs to do immediately, though, that they can provide us with is work on this loss of trust. I know there are a lot of strong feelings around the PFAA and the statement that they released a week or so ago calling for Dave Castro to step down. But the one part that I think people have overlooked that is now plainly obvious where the PFAA was right is that the community has lost trust in the organization, and many people specifically have lost trust in Dave Castro. CrossFit has to address that quickly and plainly and make a decision to help the community start to heal from that. As for the community itself, I think we need to treat this no different than any relationship. And you can either choose to be mad about it or you can choose forgiveness. I think if you choose forgiveness, then you work on this issue together, which means Dave will then need to very publicly rebuild trust with the community, which involves changing his behavior on many levels. If we don't go that route, then for lack of a better term, you divorce and move on. Now, if I have to choose, my opinion is we choose forgiveness. And I know that may feel surprising for many of you. And I know a lot of you don't want forgiveness, but I want to add some context. Personally, I've been through a divorce and I feel like I've led 5 lifetimes in the past 20 years since that happened. I am physically, emotionally, and spiritually a far cry from the man I was 20 years ago. I'd love to see our community be able to come together and find a path to be stronger as a group than go our separate ways. Now, don't misunderstand me here. Forgiveness does not cancel out the consequences of your actions or accountability. Those things will still come. It just simply means we allow for a space for growth and accept that person's desire for reconciliation if they so choose. On my last show, I mentioned that leaders rarely get fired for financial results. They find themselves at risk when they ruin relationships and create a poor culture. Currently, we're at a point where many in this community feel like their trust in Dave has been broken and that the way the situation was handled is in counter to the community-driven culture that we all love. I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating here. Change is needed, and change is scary for many, many people, but it can also bring transformational results when it's done right. Our entire community was built on that philosophy alone. If Don, Dave, and the rest of the CrossFit team wants to correct course here and correct this loss of trust, then they need to focus on humility, collaboration, and open lines of communication. The community needs to not only feel as if they've been heard and that their concerns are a priority, but they also need to see it in action. Winning back trust is incredibly hard and time consuming, but this community is resilient and desires hard work. And my hope is we can find a way to do that together.